63, a lot of Pennsylvania blacks were actually taken into slavery or re-enslaved. So that was a tremendous encouragement for many of the black men to seek to join Union forces in the Philadelphia area. And also, they did not just join the regiments at Camp William Penn. Many Philadelphia men joined the Massachusetts 54th and 55th.
Hi. Well, first, I would like to say that I was very, very pleased to get some eye opening information about Louis Wagner.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, I mean, very much so. And I can now say, although I was totally clueless then,
Uh-huh.
that I am very proud to have been a graduate of General Louis Wagner Junior High School.
Oh, that's great.
Now that that's out of the
That-
way, I just wanted to ask actually, my question is twofold.
Sure.
Was there a difference in the credentials and qualifications required of officers who would command colored troops? And the second part of my question is how were these officers viewed by their peers who commanded white regiments?
Okay, great question. Um, they were generally viewed as well. There were two. There's two parts to that answer. Some of their compatriots viewed them as in derogatory ways, right? So they looked down upon white officers who volunteered for leading black regiments. There were some, though, according to my reading, and especially the people who actually applied for those positions, thought it was honorable. So it's sort of a two-part answer, but that's how that particular situation was viewed.
And what about qualifications for these commanding officers who would,
Uh-huh.
be in charge of the black troops?
Their qualifications, the filtering system was pretty stringent. They went through extensive interviews. They had to be uh, somewhat psychologically filtered. Their professional experience and potential was carefully evaluated, but that did not all the time hamper white commanders from getting through who were racist. But the filtering system was said to be very good, and most of the people who did apply to command African American troops were actually rejected. So that's an interesting fact.
Well, many thanks to our audience for some wonderful questions that helped us to uncover even more information about Camp William Penn. There's lots more to talk about, so let's go back to Don Scott for saluting Camp William Penn. Here he is.
Okay, thank you. The men of the 25th were unfailingly proud. They were even depicted in recruiting posters that were used to convince black men to join the army, including a colorful lithograph depicting the Shelton Hills rolling countryside, but created from an earlier black and white image of the 25th USCT that's actually on the cover of my book. The lithograph clearly states that the men in the image are United States soldiers at Camp William Penn, end quote. Note the brilliant American flag and drummer boy with a bright red cap, as well as rouge and glittering gold drum. The 25th and other Camp William Penn regiments, such as the 8th, were proud, sometimes even in the midst of defeat. For instance, during the Battle of Olustee in the northern swamps of Florida, many soldiers of the 8th of Camp William Penn were ambushed, killed, or captured and sent to the notorious Confederate prison, Andersonville, where many still suffered agonizing deaths, often of starvation. Recruiting posters were often endorsed by the likes of the Reverend Elijah Weaver, editor of the African Methodist Episcopal Church's Christian Recorder newspaper, who often received accounts of such battles and letters from the soldiers. The posters also had the names of an up and coming black leader, Octavius V. Cato, and his father, Reverend William Cato, as well as Frederick Douglass and local abolitionist Robert Purvis, with very close ties to Lucretia Mott. Even as the first regiments of Camp William Penn were on the front line, recruiting meetings were held at such locales as the Mother Bethel AME Church at 6th and Lombard Streets, as well as the nearby Institute for Colored Youth that eventually became Cheyney University, my undergraduate alma mater, I might say. The ICY was the first institution for higher learning for African Americans where Octavius Cato taught and would become an administrator. Such posters were very prominent around the city throughout the war, even as it wound down. However, less than a decade before his death, Cato undoubtedly tracked the progress of the 6th USCT of Camp William Penn. That's because several of the 6 warriors earned the Medal of Honor during one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War, Chaffin's Farm, or Newmarket Heights, in September 1864. That was in Virginia, where more than 60% of the regiment would perish. It was also known as the Battle of Newmarket Heights, and one account indicated that the bullets were so intense that the sound of them smashing into one another was deafening. Yet a white officer, Nathan Edgerton, as well as Black Sergeant Alexander Kelly and Sergeant Major Thomas Hawkins, would receive the Medal of Honor for saving the flag during the fiercest part of the battle. Major General Benjamin F. Butler was thoroughly impressed with the black troops' bravery at Newmarket Heights. He said, and this is a quote, "Better men were never better led, better officers never led better men. A few more such charges, and to command colored troops will be the post of honor in the American armies." As the war wound down, there's a very good chance that Private Gabriel Butler of the 43rd USCT saw Abraham Lincoln as part of the 43rd's participation in the President's March 1865 inauguration. Before that point, the 43rd, 45th, and 8th of Camp William Penn had participated in the battles for Richmond and Petersburg, including the very bloody Battle of the Crater on July 30th, 1864. During that engagement, many of the Camp William Penn soldiers were killed, especially from the 43rd, when Union forces planted explosives under the Confederate stronghold, resulting in a massive explosion. The resulting chaos, though, allowed Confederate soldiers to rebound and inflict very heavy casualties. Many accounts indicate the black soldiers were murdered in cold blood. However, Gabriel Butler survived. Compared to many black survivors of the war, Butler seems to have been living reasonably affluent and living comfortably after the war. Many black veterans found it very hard to get pensions due to racism and alleged mix-ups in paperwork following the war, including the likes of Harriet Tubman, who led Union troops in the battle and scouted for the Union, and she actually did much more. Another survivor of the Battle of the Crater was the white officer Horace Bumstead of the 43rd USCT. After the war, Bumstead received advanced degrees, including a doctorate, focusing on theology and the sciences. hailing from an abolitionist family, he became a preacher, then college professor, before being recruited to teach earth sciences at Atlanta College. He quickly rose to become acting president and then president after his friend, the president, died. It wasn't long before Bumstead hired a young black scholar who had just written a book compiling his studies of black Philadelphians, the Philadelphia Negro. His name was W.E.B. Du Bois, destined to become the top black intellect in the country, if not then, the world. Bumstead, a great warrior for black rights, contributed to the founding of the NAACP and associated with such intellects and great artists as James Weldon Johnson, the well-known poet and writer. Indeed, Johnson penned these words about him in a poem actually entitled To Horace Bumstead. For sure, as God on his eternal throne sits, mindful of the sinful deeds of men, the awful sword of justice in his hand, you shall not, no, you shall not fight alone. As the Civil War drew to a close, a charismatic black woman strode in front of hundreds of black soldiers at Camp William Penn and delivered a stirring speech. She was the well-known ex-slave and freedom fighter Harriet Tubman, who had come to inspire the black soldiers of the 24th USCT, the last of Louis Wagner's regiments to leave the camp for war. In fact, Tubman was a wanted woman by Confederate authorities. She had made many trips into the Deep South and escorted hundreds of runaway slaves to freedom via the Underground Railroad that extended through Shelton Hills, PA. At one point, there was a $40,000 reward for her capture. A local newspaper reported that, quote, during her lecture, which she gave in her own language, she elicited considerable applause from the soldiers of the 24th Regiment, now at Camp William Penn. She gave a thrilling account of her trials in the South during the past 3 years among the contrabands and colored soldiers, and how she had administered to thousands of them and cared for their numerous necessities, end quote. Remarkably, Tubman would marry a soldier from the 8th Regiment of Camp William Penn, Private Nelson Davis. They would move to Auburn, New York after the war, living off of Nelson's pension until she was able to receive her own. Around the time that Tubman spoke to the 24th Regiment, the camp's 43rd USCT joined the pursuit of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. After participating in the capture of Petersburg, Virginia, the 43rd, along with other black regiments trained at Camp William Penn, finally caught up with Lee and were present during his April 9, 1865 surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse. Meanwhile, the 22nd USCT, which also hailed from Camp William Penn, helped to corner President Lincoln's assassins along the eastern shore of Maryland and the lower Potomac after a lengthy pursuit from April 15th through the first part of May 1865. After the Great Conflict, Benjamin F. Butler, who had pushed from the start for black men to fight with Union forces, spoke for many when he said the African American soldiers had, quote, with bayonet unlocked the iron-barred gates of prejudice and opened new fields of freedom, liberty, and equality of right. Today, virtually the only remnants of Camp William Penn are the refurbished gates, front gates, refurbished by a local community group